welcome. I'm Chad Womack. I'm a furniture designer, furniture maker. So the beginning part of this is about my background in furniture design and furniture making, which has been kind of a long journey. So with that, we'll kind of get started. Before I became involved with Seeds, I was Chad Womack Design, and that's the beginning part of this talk. I started making furniture back in 1978. I went to Northern Michigan University and studied furniture design. So this is a real early piece in red oak, very sculptural. We did real sculptural forms like this. That's up in Marquette, and that program is still going. It's a good furniture school. This was, again, a real early piece in bird's eye maple from 1979. It was a music table, so that's kind of a abstraction of a lyre on the end assembly, and that's all bent out of maple. And the top is out of bird's eye maple, and the little plugs in the end are in teak. And this is an early bent laminated chair of mine from 1982. The long bend going all the way down is bent from thin strips of veneer, but that's one piece. And that was pretty tricky at that time period to do on my own in my little shop. When I graduated from Northern, I got a job in Grand Rapids at the John Whitcomb Furniture Company, which is the oldest operating furniture company in the United States. It was a full-on working museum in a way. There was 150 employees. The building in the foreground is all wood finishing, and the building in the background was all wood manufacturing. And the pieces were made on one side of the street, and they came across the bridge to the finishing side. There were two separate mindsets. The side on the manufacturing was very meticulous, very technical, very driven. And on the other side of the street, it was a wild show. It was full of artists painting furniture, creating new finishes, doing decorations. It was quite a place. I worked there for 18 years. I first started out as a sander, and I thought I was going to be a sample maker, but the guy that hired me was a master craftsman from Germany, and he called me up, and I couldn't understand his voice. He said, we hire you for a sander. And I thought he said sample maker. And I got to work first day, and I'm like, oh God. But I only sanded for about a month. And then I got into making samples. And I eventually became an engineer, and then the head of engineering, and then design, and then vice president of design and product development. And this was my first major collection, which was the Russian collection. And I was the first person in the United States to ever introduce Russian furniture to anywhere. It was never developed and never done before. You had French, English, Italian, German, and Chinese or Asian, but never any Russian. And this was inspired by Catherine the Great and the palaces in Russia, which is so sad what's going on now with it, the whole attitude there. But this was right at the beginning of, this was when glasnost was just taking off. And I hit that timing-wise just right. And picture of me with the Russian chair was in every decorating magazine in the country. And this is about 1987. And here's the chair as well, photographed by the famous photographer William Wegman with the Weimaraner. He does all the Weimaraner poses, you see him. And this is what he did. This was in probably Town and Country or House and Garden or something. And then this was the ad for the Russian collection. That was an Architectural Digest saying glasnost at the bottom, and a very captivating romantic scene, the romance of old Russia. And so this is pretty exotic furniture, very highly decorative. This is a dining room table and chairs and credenza in the back, all in the early 19th century Russian style. I'm an expert in 18th century Russian furniture. I've studied it in St. Petersburg in the library in the Hermitage, as well as in the Slavonic division of the New York Public Library. And I actually had a Russian woman who was my assistant in the library in New York. The card catalog was all in Cyrillic, so she would help me go through the card catalog. But when I first met her, she said, well, what are you here for? He says, well, I'm looking for pictures of Russian bedrooms. And she goes, oh, that is much too private. We will not find any. But eventually we found some, and this was the Russian bedroom that was developed for John Woodicombe. After the Russian collection, I did the British India collection, which is based upon the English in India in the 19th to the early 20th century, maybe even a little bit earlier. So it was furniture that was inspired by English decoration, English design, that was made by Indian craftsmen. And they actually took Thomas Chippendale's Director, which was a large folio of plates, to India on the ship, and then they had craftsmen create those designs in India and then send them back to England. And so they had this very Anglo-inspired furniture. And it's pretty fascinating. Both Indian details as well as some Portuguese details. It depends on what region in India they were produced. And I had a chance to travel all over India in search of pieces of Indian furniture. So I have pretty eclectic taste. And then later on, I did the 40s French collection, which is based upon the designs in France in the 40s of leading designers like André Arbus and Emilio Terry. And we'll talk a little bit about Emilio Terry in a bit, but the table is inspired by Emilio Terry. And it's cherry solids and various veneers. Again, another picture of the 40s French dining room. So this was in maple burl veneer. It's very well received, and 40s French design now is very highly collected, and it's almost, when I did this back in the 90s, at least you could maybe buy it. Now it's going for in the hundreds of thousands to $1 million for designers that are known to have designed these specific pieces. So it's a very highly collected area of design. And then from John Woodicombe, I got an opportunity to go to England, and I got hired by a company called Arthur Brett & Sons in Norwich, England. And Norwich is about 100 miles north of London. It's up on the North Sea. And they had a small woodworking factory there, or woodworking workshop, they should call it in England. And they had about 120 employees, 100 to 120. And we made very high-end English furniture for very wealthy families. This was a reproduction that we did based upon a design by William Weil that was all done in mahogany and all beautifully hand-carved by one man who's very well known in England. So we did one-of-a-kind pieces for private clients. We also did work for the Saudis. We did tables for the OPEC summits. This table for Arthur Brett was one of my designs, and this was really an interesting piece. It was based upon Tunbridge ware from England in the 19th century, and they built a lot of really decorative boxes. And the top is based upon Tunbridge ware, and the top has various marquetries of different veneers, and then also there's an inlay of marbleized paper. And the Tunbridge ware had this really unique technique of creating marble with wood that I had no idea how they did it. And so what we did with this is we inlaid a band of paper into the table, but it had to be put in exactly at the very, after it was all finished, not finished with polish on it, but all completely sanded, and they put in the paper, and it had to go in perfectly because if you couldn't sand the paper, and then you would lacquer on top of it. But recently, just the last month, I got a hold of a book from Germany that's all about dyeing wood. And in this book, they have the technique and how to do this marbling type feeling that they did in the 19th century, which I've never seen before. And we've all been looking at it at the Seeds Workshop with my group, talking about how maybe we could mess around with this and create something really unique, which I hope we do. So Arthur Brett, I designed very kind of neoclassical designs in the Regency period, and tables like this and various veneers. And my bench for Arthur Brett, very high style, not Regency period, but very kind of avant-garde. And we sold a lot of these very well. So then after working for Arthur Brett for about 4.5 years, I did some work for a fellow that came in who wanted some chairs reproduced that he bought. And the chairs were designed by James Wyatt, who is an 18th century architect that was on the same level as Robert Adam in England. And He bought these chairs, and the set of 12 chairs was $750,000. And they had come out of the Met, and they were de-ascensioned by the Metropolitan, and they were designed by James Wyatt, and he wanted to make 12 more. So I ended up working on that project, and I actually designed the arms for 2 chairs that were in the set because they never had arms, because they didn't have arms on armchairs in the 18th century. But he lived in a very nice house called Heavingham Hall. And Heavingham Hall was designed by James Wyatt in the late 18th century. It's 22 bedrooms on 800 acres. It was basically a wreck when he bought it. I mean, a lot of the interiors were intact, but generally it was pretty rough. It has the most important painted room in England in it. It's all in 2 colors, green and white, because according to the notes in the files, that's all they could afford was the green and the white. They couldn't afford to have the room painted in colors. It had a variety of fantastic rooms where I was able to do some work in. And this is the entrance hall for Heavingham Hall. As you come in the front door, it'd be on the left-hand side, and down at the end of the hall is where you go into the library. But this is, again, considered one of the most important rooms in England. And this is a private house. Nobody can go see this house. A lot of houses that are private houses, they let people through the Furniture History Society, where I used to go on tours with the group there, where you could go to things like National Trust properties that are in the movies that you see in England, or the owners will let the Furniture History Society come through because they're all a bunch of scholars or antique dealers, or the guys that run Christie's or Sotheby's in London for furniture sales. But this house was totally private. And then one day, after we had made the chairs and I had left Arthur Brett, he called me up and he said, "Hey, would you be interested in designing some dressing tables for my wife?" And I said, "Yeah, I think so. Let's talk about it." So I went to have the meeting with him, and he said, "Well, my wife's birthday is coming up, and I think it was about 8 months." And he said, "I'd like you to design some cabinets for her to hold her watches." And I said, "Okay." He said, "Well, each cabinet needs to hold 50 watches." I said, "Really? That's a lot of watches." And they're Patek Philippe vintage cocktail watches. So this was a lot of watches and a lot of money. These were highly collected. She kept a number of them in her handbag at all times. I don't know what, she changed them, I guess. So this was the cabinet that I designed called the Wyatt Commodes that were based upon this to hold the 50 watches. And you can see in the top corner here, you can see the watches laid out. There's a series of watches across the top. There's 2 levels of the watches, and there's various, and those compartments are lined. I came back to Michigan, and I bought Michigan deerskin, and I lined the interior with Michigan deerskin. And then there's numerous super compartments, and there's a temple that raises up and down that you can raise up with the temple from their garden carved into the front of it. So these were quite 2 pieces, and I had to make 2 of them. One was like 80 inches, and the other one was 72 inches. So they were 2 different sizes, which makes it easier. It would be nicer if they were the same size. But a guy who had a little cabinet shop in Wales, he made them for me. He also polished them, but I did all the mechanics, designed the whole thing, did all the layouts, and developed the whole process. It was quite the undertaking. And she loved them. So here's a little picture of the drawers on the side that come out, and then the temple raised up, and the decoration is in the style based upon James Wyatt's drawings that I found in various sources, the V&A, reference books on Wyatt, whatever, and decorations from the decorators who actually painted the rooms. So they were all kind of authentically based upon Wyatt's work. This again, the temple, and this is the mechanism that I developed to lock the lid. So when you close the center lid and lock it, it locked the 2 lids on the left and right-hand side. So this is the little temple that is in the garden that front of the cabinet that popped up was based on. So it was a Wyatt temple. I worked there on and off for a couple years. I did a 22-foot long dining table for them that had the $750,000 chairs plus the other 12 around it. I did design work, drew the fireplace that was missing. Somebody had stole it out of the house, a marble fireplace. From my drawings, they had it recreated. And I also did drawings for some of the interior rooms that Wyatt didn't finish that involved folding shutters and doors. A lot of research involved. After I left England, I moved back to Traverse City. I'm not from Traverse City originally, but I'm from Detroit, and we had a home on Torch Lake where I spent all my summers. I went to NMC for my associate's degree, and my mother was living up here at the time, so we thought it'd be nice for us to come back. So I developed a small little workshop here in Traverse City where I produce one-of-a-kind pieces for private clients. This is a walnut dining table on bent laminated legs, 3-filler table. They're handmade table slides that I made that are quarter sawn oak, and then they're fitted with rosewood dovetail keys. And they slide on the rosewood keys that are inside the table slides. This is the bending jig for the legs to create the bends for the legs. And I ended up designing another table using the same jig, a couple different things. When I went to school at Northern, we did a lot of bending. My professor was really good at it. And it was a great experience to learn that. And so it's like one of these will have maybe, I don't know, maybe 30 layers of walnut veneer with glue between each layers, and then you bend them and put them in the form, and you let it sit for, a day, let it dry for 24 hours. And you have to figure into whether it will spring back or whether it spring out, depending on how tight the bend is. And it's a lot of fun. This is the base being assembled in my shop. And then this is kind of a quirky American walnut desk. I call it the clear desk. It's based upon the idea of going clear, which you do in Scientology, which I'm not in Scientology, but I just thought that the idea was kind of interesting. It's a very kind of quirky idea for a desk. This is for a house on Old Mission Peninsula, a very mid-century modern house, a really architect design house. It's a real gem. It was designed in the 70s, so this is a bookcase, a desk, and a chair that I did for this client, and all sorts of woods. The tabletop's in cherry. The base of the pedestal is in Douglas fir, and the supports are in African wenge, and the chair was in wenge and cherry. So this is the chair. So I do modern work as well, but I also do traditional work. I had a client come to me, and this was a pair of bookcases that he bought. And they came out of a drugstore, I guess in Traverse City, and they were built in 1900, 1910, and they were part of an apothecary unit for a drugstore. And so he wanted me to make a TV cabinet out of it. So this is a 20-foot long TV cabinet that is made out of 2 apothecary cabinets on the left and the right on both sides. And the center breakfront bookcase is based upon the same design details as the oak cabinets themselves. Same, almost exact identical moldings that I created and sliding doors in the bottom. And they were kind of mass-produced apothecary cabinets. You could buy different combinations of them, but I never found out where they came from. And they had beadboard backs. I don't remember originally how he came up with that. I don't think they had that originally. And that's the detail of the cornice molding, the old cabinet matching up to the new cabinet. And one of my other projects, a client came to me who just built a new house designed in the style of Frank Lloyd Wright. And he wanted a dining table in the Wright style. That was a pun, I guess. And so I set about coming up with some ideas for what a Frank Lloyd Wright dining table would look like. And he didn't give me any direction, so I developed this piece. And it's based upon 2 things. It's based upon Wright's oak park work, which was very much the spindle work, very stickly in style. and then also his later Usonian work, which is flat, planar, angular pieces. So I combined both of them together and created a unique design inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright. So this is the end assembly of this tapered, I don't know, end panel, I guess, end assembly. And these are the stools that inspired me on how to develop the end assembly. There's a hotel in Oklahoma, I don't remember the name of it. These come up for sale every now and then at auction in Paris. They're not very expensive. I know they're $5,000 or $6,000 a piece, but they're really unique Frank Lloyd Wright pieces. And another project I had was for a client that wanted a desk for his daughter. And so this is a walnut and parchment desk that I developed with the cabinetry in parchment and then the framing in walnut. So parchment is goat skin. And goat skin was really popular in the 40s in France. The richest of the rich, through like designers like Jean-Michel Franck, who is very well known now, covered complete rooms in parchment. Goat skin, so the skins are very small. You know how big a goat's is, this little guy. So they're all done in kind of patchworks. This is all covered with goat skin. This is like just like doing veneer work around the cabinetry. Quite a complicated piece. You can see on the end assembly, this is the desk assembly before the cabinets are in it. And after the disc was assembled, I inserted the cabinet up underneath it into the cavity to create the drawer sections. And then the drawer on the left here is a secret compartment, which I usually do in my desk, where you pull the drawer halfway out, there's a key, and then the drawer swings open on hinges. And this is from the 18th century, both German and English. David Ruthven, who was one of the great German cabinet makers for Catherine the Great, he did furniture for her that had all kinds of secret compartments. And then also Thomas Sheraton, the English furniture maker in the later part of the 18th century, also designed drawers like this in his dressing tables for women. So, and I kind of recreated it using modern sauce hinges, which are invisible hinges, and interesting kind of they're called, the Germans call them a link-lock lock or something. Really nice locks. A design for Steinway. This was never produced, but this was a really nice project to work on. Steinway is just an incredible company. You wouldn't believe it. The amazing thing about these pianos is those soundboards, they have everything is temperature controlled down to the degree or more. And they actually shrink the soundboard as it's in a drying oven after it's made to go in the soundboard for the piano. And they bring it out, install it in the piano, and as it absorbs moisture, it cups to create the soundboard for the strings. It's amazing. They actually had the biggest planer I've ever seen in my life. And it was like 70 inches wide. And it was 2 different heads working together in one planer, and it was made specifically for Steinway. And the factory there had been going, it's by LaGuardia. It has been there since the middle of so I'm thinking, what's it, 1870s, 1860s. And they still, they still operate parts of the old part, and they have very modern parts. They have solar panels on the roof. They're a very progressive company, and they do beautiful work. This is a mid-century modern bookcase in the 1950s mid-century style with painted doors, and it's in walnut and teak and painted. This is a little, I call it the one-night stand in ash. We had a funny thing at John Whitcomb. They had bowling shirts for the bowling team, and they had a little French nightstand on the back of the shirt, and it was the one-night stand bowling team. So that's kind of a funny sense. They had it for years too, but this is based upon 1940s design that I kind of developed. This is the Chirot tea table. I did this for Louise Haggerty in town. This is for her living room, and she wanted a tea table that she could use and fold up and put beside the wall. So I developed these hinges where the thing was like a butterfly, and it would fold in on both sides, and you could drop the hinges like you see along the wall here. And the hinges were made, I developed them out of stainless steel and then had them water jet cut, which is a fantastic technique. And this is a wormy maple folding desk that I recently did, and this was for a client of mine who wanted a desk for her guest bedroom that she could fold up and put away when she had guests. And so the legs fold in and the top folds down. And this is in wormy maple or spalted maple. You'll see another piece I did for them coming up, but they cut down some trees in their beech trees and maple trees in their yard, and they stacked it all up on sticks like you're supposed to do. They did everything right, and they had it all stacked up, but they never put a top on it. So there was no cover on it, so all the rain just went all through it, and that rain caused the wood to disfigure in what they call ambrosia maple or spalted maple, and maple and beech spalt the most. And that just means it's decayed and there's fungus in the wood, and it gets these great streaks in it, and that's what that's from. And there's some spalting in the cocktail tabletop over there that I did. Now we move to seeds. Welcome to Seed Studio. And so this is our little studio that's down in the blacksmith shop that we developed. It's coming. We have small woodworking machinery, a little bit, and we're getting some more eventually. So my goal was to develop some products for seeds that they could build and they could sell, and then also they could reproduce. But there's also a caveat, there was some unique pieces involved, out of reclaimed wood, recycled wood, or invasive species wood. So I thought, well, what would Robert Manwaring do in 1765 in England? He was a cabinet maker there, and so I figured that if he was going to make chairs for seeds, they would look something like this. They were like trees growing in them, growing out of them. The legs are tree branches, this is from a plate from a book that's in my library. I was thinking the other day, God, Robert Manwaring did chairs like that. Seeds would love them. So it kind of reflects the whole seeds ideology. So to take that idea a little bit further, back to Emilio Terry. Emilio Terry showed it in my 40s French collection. I got infatuated with Emilio Terry. He was a surrealistic architect, and you can see his most famous architectural drawing and model is for the house on the left here. So that's Maison Escargot, which is and you can see the layout of the rooms in Maison Escargot. And then also his chairs for seeds, but he hadn't got hired yet. So, but he was something else. He did great furniture. He did furniture for Salvador Dali. So it was kind of he was somewhat involved with the famous May lip sofa. Ever seen that? It's a big red sofa that looks like a pair of lips that Dali did. He was on a project for a really rich Charles Bastigi in Paris, where he had a villa in Paris, and so they decided that they were going to furnished the very top floor, the roof. So they built a room up on the roof with no roof, with no top on top. And they had May-Wish sofa up there. They had a chimney up there. You could see the Eiffel Tower, all this whimsical furniture. It was a riot. But so Terry was involved with that. But these are his cornstalk chairs, where one is flowering and has an ear of corn and the other one doesn't. So then we go on to, so Jennifer, who hired me, she, when I first hired, I interviewed with her. I said, I don't want to do chairs. No, it takes too long, too complicated. So I work about a month, and Jennifer says, what about doing porch chairs, furniture? And I said, oh, really? And I said, okay. So I got to thinking about it, and every decorating magazine, everybody that's everybody or anybody has got these Pierre Jeanneret Chandigarh chairs from 1950. So Chandigarh was an area in India up by the Pakistan border. I've been there. When I went and did my tour of British India, I went up there. But I didn't really know much about what Jeanneret did, but it was also, who am I thinking of? They designed this whole city there. So these chairs that you see in here, they made thousands of them. And they made them for both the schools, for all the public buildings. They were everywhere. So Pierre Jeanneret is Le Corbusier's cousin. So he worked in Corbusier's design studio with Le Corbusier. So Le Corbusier was crazy, and he's actually considered the greatest architect of the 20th century. But he didn't like to he didn't like to finish jobs. He would build things and then he would leave. And he'd get tired of it, and Jeanneret would finish up after him. So these chairs, that there's thousands of them, end up in Kim Kardashian's living room. And they're in everybody's living room. If you remember these chairs, you'll see one a week in magazines. In fact, Jennifer was telling me, she goes, Chad, are you interested in dyeing wood? And I said, yeah, of course. And so she gives me this video to watch of this woman dyeing wood who's in Switzerland, who's from Washington. And the first thing that's in her studio that they show in the video about dyeing wood is a Pierre Jeanneret chair being restored. And I go, you gotta be kidding me. In this little LTA in Switzerland where she's working. So these chairs are everywhere, and here they are. This is them being thrown out. And then they were collected by world-famous interior designers like Axel Verwalt, who did actually the Kardashian. I can't remember who she's married to. It's not Puff Daddy, but somebody like that. She did their house that's like totally, there's like nothing in it. It's totally empty. But there's probably these chairs. But he got involved with selling these chairs, buying them in India cheap, along with some other dealers, and selling them to very wealthy clients. And they go for $10,000 a piece or more now, and they probably found them for nothing. So we decided, so they were the influence for the bench that we have here, that very much influenced by the Pierre Jeanneret chair. And so then the reclaimed wood part of this all was using black locust, which I've never used before. And if you know anything about seeds, you've heard the word black locust. And I'd been in furniture a long time, and I'd been all over the world buying veneer, Switzerland, France, Italy, South America. I went to a veneer mill in India. I never heard of black locust and never even saw it. So black locust has some really unique properties. It's almost rot resistant. It's the most rot resistant timber in the United States. It supposedly will last for 70 years. The Indians use it to build huts out of, to build the long houses out of. They actually used to take the black locust trees and they would burn the end of the poles and put that into the earth, and because the actual process of burning them made them even more rot resistant. So we're all sold on how the great how rot resistant black locust is, and it's called an invasive species. And one day in the workshop, we were working on the bench, working on the coffee table. Somebody came in. The two people came in that were funders of seeds, and the one guy says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, we're making this bench out of black locust." He said, "You wouldn't believe the story." He said, one day, he said, "I live in town." One day we had, outside my house, we had two kids at early evening or the nighttime, and I thought they were both loaded. And they were standing around, oohing and ahhing, looking up at this tree, saying, "Oh, this is the biggest black locust tree I've ever seen in my life." And they couldn't believe it. They were just flabbergasted. And so he goes out there and asks him, he said, "Well, we're from seeds." And so that was pretty good. So you can see it's the headquarter of black locust. And in this book, Woods in the British Furniture Making in 1400 to 1900, is a book by a friend of mine in England called Adam Bowitt. And Adam Bowitt has his PhD in the mahogany trade in the 18th century. And now he's become the world's leading authority on wood identification, uses of wood in furniture. He goes to Christie's, Sotheby's. When the expert there can't figure out what kind of wood it is, they call him in. And he also writes some great books. And I have worked with him before in England, and we actually we developed a chest of drawers that was based upon a model from the 1680 that had come over from Holland. And it turns out that at this time period in 1680, they actually were making these chests in England with what they call oyster shell veneer, which is any type of wood that you want to do, but it's like the circular ring of a branch that you veneer together into marquetry pattern. And veneer it together, and it was very popular in England. And they would make these chests in Holland, little 4-drawer chests, send them to England, KD, knocked down, just like IKEA, in 1680. And then they would build the chests in England, and then they were made out of maple veneer, maple oyster shells, and then they would polish them with finish made out of, it was made out of turpentine or pine, some pine spirits, and lamp black. And so the black would get into the pores of the veneer, and it would make it look like tortoiseshell. And so they called it mulberry. So that was the mulberry finish. So I ended up developing a chest with Adam that's in a museum in England that is finished in mulberry style finish and veneer from the 1680s. Very interesting stuff. So we all know that black locust is an invasive species. I wish we should have warning lights on it on the sign here, but this is Michigan's stance against black locust. But Jennifer said to me the other day she thought that maybe the DNR or the people that label this are looking at it again and reevaluating whether it really is to be like a banned species. But that's to be seen what will happen. So there is a I don't have my map. There's I had a map. Black locust is native to down by Mississippi and some in Mexico, and that's the only region that it was originally grown in. But now it grows all over the eastern side of the United States. And as well, and what Adam Bowitt says in his book is that it was exported to England as early as like the 1700s, but it never took on as any sort of use for cabinet wood. But so it's an invasive species, but it's becoming accepted. So so Jennifer asked me, well, will you design a bench? And I said it was kind of too complicated. One of the tools that I use that I could show that the EcoCorps people that I work with is this human scale by Henry Dreyfuss. And this is one of, I think there's 4 different indexes, double-sided. And this little template, you can spin the wheel and it can tell you, like this shows the seating for like automotive or lounge seating. So you spin the little wheel on the right and you put it on what size style of seating that you want, lounge seating, race car seating, executive office, couch, or whatever. And that'll tell you what the angle of the seat should be, what the angle of the back should be, how high the armrest should be, what the height of the seat off the floor should be. So you can pick and choose what you want to use to figure out your dimensions are for your piece of furniture. And so we use this to create the seating posture for the bench. So that's the difficulty in seating, is that you have to accommodate the human being. It's not just like making a table. You got to, one is they've got to sit comfortably, and 2, that chair seating, you look at it from all the way around 360 degrees as opposed to case furniture. So here's the seeds bench in development at the workshop. Here's on the left, there's the assembly of the legs going together with the seat assembly being glued on that is already put together. This is glued and then it's screwed together with stainless steel screws. You can see at the very top of the post on the left side is a tenon sticking out, and that tenon runs all the way through the legs in that joint, of that miter joint, and it's a spline, and that connects them together. They're super strong. And then there's a tenon at the top that the arm sits on. So it's all part of the construction. And here you see, back up. There's Matt and Caitlin working on sanding the joints for the bench, the back assembly of the joints. And so what I do is I'm involved with all the EcoCorps team people, and I'm involved with teaching them woodworking. A lot of them haven't had any experience with woodworking at all, so it's all new to them. And it's quite a challenge, and it's quite an opportunity, and quite fun, really. And I'm amazed by the persistence and the learning, the wanting to learn that the EcoCorps people exhibit. It's pretty amazing. And they do a great job. And once once you explain what you want to do and start showing them, they really catch on with what's supposed to happen. So again, some more assembly of the bench. You can see this was gluing up, and that was a process. So the ends were done, and Monica's here, and she helped me glue this up, and it was a challenge, but you have to get everything just right, and then you go with the glue and hope for the best. So that's the chair being glued up on the left, and then on the right you can see the arm is being glued on after it was assembled. And it's a good thing that I hadn't put in the seat rails at that point. I didn't know if I would have, but then I wouldn't have been able to clamp it like this to attach the arm like I did. And actually, after the arm sets on the tenon, there's a hidden screw that goes through that attaches the arm to the tenon itself, so that won't ever come apart. And here's, again, some other views of the bench with the arm being clamped up. And here's the bench on the right before the actual seat rails go in. And on the left is Caitlin, Lauren, and Sam all outside with the bench when we're getting finished for the project. And there must have been I'd say 15 different people that worked on this with me, which was pretty interesting, really. And I have never taught anybody anything before, really, except maybe my kids, but they wouldn't attest to that. But they've done a great job. So, I'm always looking for inspiration, and sometimes you have to look far and wide. But if you want to find somebody to help you design a coffee table, who could do it, really? Besides Kramer. He is the first person to ever write a book about coffee tables that turned into a coffee table. It was amazing. You couldn't believe it. And you can't buy these anymore. They're sold out. Just impossible. So he's in the pantheon of great furniture designers. So when I was in school in 1977, 78, 79, this book was published in 1970. And there was a copy of it floating around our workshop. And we all knew, it was my professors, and we all knew about it. And now it's becoming, it's more important than it ever has been, because it lists the names of the founders of the American craft furniture movement. These guys were the beginning. And you got to remember that Fine Woodworking magazine didn't come out until 1975 as their first issue. And it's so different than it is today. It's just mind-blowing when I go back and look at those. But so we have George Nakashima, Sam Maloof, Wharton Esherick, Arthur Espent Carpenter, and Wendell Castle. Wendell Castle would have been, so this is 1970, and it was an exhibit at the Smithsonian, which is pretty incredible. Wendell Castle was the youngest. He became a very famous furniture designer, sculptor, for his very sculptural tables. He just recently passed away. And the other two that are extremely important to me are the first name, George Nakashima. We can blame him for a lot of things. And Wharton Esherick is the other one. Wharton Esherick was the oldest. So I think Wharton Esherick must have been born in the 1920s. But he was working in the 40s, 50s, into the early 60s, building very sculptural furniture. Like this incredible, this is a drop leaf table that the top is curved and the drop leaf is curved, which is just extraordinary. But this is 1950, which is amazing for what it is. And his most famous piece here is his little library step stool. And I don't know what the estimate is on this. Oh, 20 to 30,000. So Esherick is very highly collected. And he designed his whole house. And it was all really quirky and all beautifully detailed, very sculptural. And he was a sculptor, he was a wood sculptor as well as a furniture maker. And so the one we can blame a lot of stuff on, though, is George Nakashima. George Nakashima was the one who brought slab table mania to America. Everywhere you look, somebody wants a slab table. And he was the one who did a variety of slab table out of these exotic sizes, exotic species, and he did amazing work. They were very sculptural. They were very much in his own style. He completely furnished one of Nelson Rockefeller's houses in upstate New York in the Catskills with all this sculptural furniture, and sofas and lamps that were just fabulous. And now they go, for thousands of dollars. This Nakashima's table is at $250,000 to $350,000 estimate. There was one that just sold in May this year, a table that he made, 16 feet long. It was book matched, 2 boards, so it was 2 boards put together, 16 feet long, walnut, and it sold for $450,000. Just incredible. But he was the one that started the slab table whole phenomena. And again, then you can see the bow tie joints. The bow ties were kind of brought to America by George Nakashima, as far as I can tell. They tie the wood together if it's cracking, and it's they're about a half an inch deep. They're put in there, and they prevent the wood from splitting any further. So then, so on to, this is again some of my work, and this very much influenced, well, I influenced my own work, but as well as Kramer. But this coffee table I did, this is in spalted maple. These are the clients that let all the water run through their wood. So it has a center divider or center stretcher, and this was my first I don't know, theory or philosophical theory on the idea of the stretcher moving through the panel and coming out the other side in a different form, kind of mystical in a way, kind of shamanistic of Eastern Russian shamans, of the steppe, of that whole area of Asia between Russia and China. So that was the first attack at it. And you can see so the stretcher comes through and it's a square through the table, and then as it moves through the panel, it turns and becomes a diamond as it comes out. So it's transforming. And then this is a picture of my clients with their wonderful Japanese tea service that they use the table for. So that was the first, that was number 1. And then this was number 2. This was for a person in town that then I took the same idea of the stretcher moving through the panel, and then almost like a wand, a magic wand that had a diamond in the center, and the diamond is inlaid with ebony, and then the ends of the panel are cut through with diamonds that are also inlaid with ebony. So it's the same idea of the shamanistic spirituality of the piece. So then we go on to the coffee table. So these were the, Jennifer mentioned in her introduction that they had cut down some trees around the barn down here, and then they had saved them from going to the landfill, and they ended up in our little workshop. So we have we have about half a dozen or more of these slabs that are this size that we can make tables out of. So this is Connor and Matt, EcoCorps team members, showing the slab before I cut it. And so you can see on the table over there, the 2 end panels are taken off the side, taken off of the top. So I got both end panels and the top out of that one piece of wood. So here we have Elisa, who was never used a router before, but here's after training, safety training, wearing all the proper gear, protection gear. She's flattening this slab after I had cut it to, I think it's 44 inches at this point. And so she's flattening it all out so the steel panel there has the router, and the router goes across and you move the router down. And so you can flatten out a wide piece of wood, which you couldn't, our planer is only 12 inches. So we couldn't flatten it. It's 20 inches wide. We couldn't flatten it, so that's how we were able to flatten it. So that's what Elisa's doing. And then Taryn here, she never used a router before. And she's, from a template, she's routing for the bow ties in the top that are the little inlaid pieces of walnut that we have in the top that had come from somewhere in our, they cut down a walnut tree and we got the wood. So that's all I know about it. There is no history on that one. But that's where the walnut's from. There's a story about that. Anyway, so here it is, the inlay of the butterfly dovetail going in to keep the crack from widening, and there'll be a series of 5 that go into the top of the table. And here's Elisa, again, working, she's cutting the little bow ties out with the bandsaw. And I must say, I was really impressed. Some of the first, they take their time and they're conscious of what they're doing. They're really good. I mean, it's just a little bandsaw, but they're really capable if they really are trying hard. Really amazing. So this is the top. You can see with now the 5 dovetail slots, bow ties cut out in the top along that crack. And then bow ties will be inserted to those a 1/2 inch thick to keep the whole thing from falling apart. Because it literally, probably, if it wasn't that big, it probably would have fallen apart. So here's the pieces that I cut off the end that are now on the end of the table. Those pieces, I was afraid that if I tried to machine them in any way, the state that they were in, they would probably blow up in the machine. So I put dowels through the panels when I cut it apart on the sections so that the dowels created like an internal armature for the pieces to hold on to so they won't come apart. And some of the places on the table you can see through the panel, that they're just kind of hanging out there, which is, I really like that. I think that's great, that's part of it. So they're reinforced, they aren't gonna break. And though this is the, and also on the end panels on the table, they're 15 inches wide, where the tabletop is 20 inches wide. And I had to figure out, how do I get 5 inches out of the panel without ruining the aesthetic of them? So on a couple different ones, I cut them in 3 different places and then took out plain pieces of wood and put of the inside of the panel and then put them back together again so that you really wouldn't see any disruption in the grain features in the wood. They would just disappear. In which, if you look at the table from the ends, you can see the grain panel, the grain structure on the end can almost literally follow through right over to the top, exactly. It's not as, the only thing I didn't do right on that part of it is when I cut the top, I cut one end of it and then had cut the 2 pieces out of the one end. I should have cut the center out and then dropped them like drop leaves and kept them right that way so they were exactly the same. But I didn't really know what I was gonna do. A lot of time, when I build my own stuff, it's not a production thing. It's literally, it's like composing something. I don't know where I'm going, but something's gonna lead the way, and usually it's the wood. And then this shows the end panel being glued up. It's got this funny little structure around it. That's to be able to clamp it together when it's a live edge grain, because you couldn't get a clamp on it. The clamp wouldn't hold it because it would pull it one way or the other. So that frame right there that's on there, that's just temporary, but that's for clamping it together. And then this side, on the right-hand side, is the first visual of what this base might look like. And so I was like thinking, well, what kind of a base am I going to make? And I'm kind of neoclassical and very influenced by Emilio Terry and people like James Wyatt from England. I think like that. That's how I think. I don't think like a seeds person. Or aesthetically, you know. I'm not like, I mean, the idea of a perfect seeds table would be 2 trees growing out of the ground with the roots there in the earth with a board on top. That'd be your coffee table. It'd be like, brilliant, this is all we need, you know. That's the aesthetic. So this base assembly is so one day I was thinking, what if I took the edges of the boards and made them into the base? Well, okay. So I had a piece of it, and I cut it out, and I put it on there and go, yeah, that might work. But the only problem was I had cut the wood to certain lengths. If I would have cut it longer, I could have maybe wrapped around 3 sides with the same piece of wood to create the framing of the bottom of it. Because then when you cut it, it would be pretty close to the same profile. And if you've ever mitered moldings together, you kind of want them exactly the same profile. But these ones are all coming at you with different profiles because they're natural. They grew that way, that's the way they are. So I put them together the best I could to make them match up how they would be. So you can see, this is, Sam had worked on this quite a bit. We had quite a number of, and Caitlin, heroic attempts to try and glue these things together. And we finally came up a way with putting clamps on the bottom and tying them together and then strapping them with straps. There was 2 more straps that went on there. What you can see on the left side here in that corner, the one on the end is like way bigger than the one on the side. It's sticking way out. So that had to be all sculpted down carefully to kind of try and reframe some sort of the same shape. Also, we sanded all of this live edge grain started with 150 sandpaper, which is, I've never done that before. So usually you start with 80, you want to get out all the scratches. Well, we were trying to keep all of the irregularities of the wood, and we didn't want to sand those away. So we were able to keep, you can see in the pieces, the actual, the variations in the wood. And here's Sam trying it again here with biscuiting the pieces on the bottom and then just clamping them on the top. And then this picture, this is kind of the first time the coffee table was up before the stretcher was made. And the picture on the other side is the center medallion for the stretcher that you'll see. I was in the shop, I was with Caitlin, and I'm going, I had done some walnut ones that I thought would be really nice, but they were too dark, and something was really bugging me. And then I asked Caitlin, well, what should we do? And so, well, she came up with some ideas, and she said something like, well, you can't cheat. And she said, well, you cheated, because I had made the walnut insets from some wood that I had in my shop that somebody gave me. So it wasn't from the Seeds Workshop. So she was, you're cheating, Chad. And so we finally came up to the idea that maybe we could take, when I make something, I like to save all the pieces, I like all the little pieces that I cut off, and I put them in a box. So, and then when I get done after that, I can throw them all away. But sometimes, like something like this, you go, what did I do with that piece that I cut off the end that's this big? And it was in the box. And you can use it to make something out of it, and you can use it to repair your mistakes out of. So that's where you can see the little pattern in the inlay on the table in the stretcher. And then this is the finished coffee table with the stretcher in for Seed Studio Coffee Table 2022. It has the little medallion in the center. The stretcher is doing more than it ever has, and this is being the 3rd incarnation of it. We're actually, when it's moving through the end panel, it's really transforming into a whole different form, which is, you can see, real interesting, kind of an octagon effect on the end. And then in the center diamond is this piece from the core of the rotten wood that's kind of highlighting it, that has a sort of a yin and yang look to it, which is quite fascinating. And then here's all my partners, some of them, with me getting pictures for the bench. And that's kind of a little overview of what we do at the Seed Studio. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you, Chad, for all of your hard work over the summer and working with our EcoCorps folks. You're all
Yeah.